Admiral Hyun-woo Kim walked through the massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers. The room was huge, bigger than any building he had ever seen on Earth. Towers of different alien species rose up around him like metal trees reaching toward the ceiling. Each tower held a different race from across the galaxy. The air smelled strange here. It was clean but had a metallic taste that reminded him of the inside of a spaceship. Lights from 100 different worlds lit up the chamber in colors that had no names in human language. Blue, purple, green, and shades that made his eyes water if he looked too long. Hyun-woo wore his best uniform. A dark blue fabric had been pressed until it looked perfect. Gold buttons caught the alien lights and threw them back in tiny flashes. On his chest, medals from 3 years of service to the Council caught the light. Each one represented a mission where humans had helped other species. Each one was a symbol of Earth's place among the stars. He was not alone. Ambassador So-young Park walked beside him. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple style that looked professional but not cold. She had been Earth's voice in the Council for 2 years now. Her job was to speak for all humans, to make sure their needs were heard and understood. Behind them came a small group of Earth's best people. Scientists, soldiers, and diplomats who had worked hard to build trust with the alien races. They all believed in the same dream. Humans could be part of something bigger than just one planet. The council chamber was full today. Representatives from 40 different worlds had come to see this moment. Some looked like humans but with different colored skin or eyes. Others were so strange that Hyun-woo had to look away to keep from staring. There were beings made of what looked like living crystal. Others seemed to be made of gas held together by force fields. At the center of the chamber stood the speakers. Platform, Counselor Vextar waited there. He was from the Altarian race. His people looked almost human, but their skin was pale blue and their eyes were solid black. Vextar had been the one to invite Earth into the council 3 years ago. He had promised that humans would find friends among the stars. Admiral Kim, Vextar's voice was smooth and warm. It came through translators that made it sound almost human. Please step forward. Hyun-woo walked to the center of the chamber. His boots made soft sounds on the metal floor. Around him, hundreds of alien eyes watched. Some were curious. Others seemed bored. A few looked at him with what might have been respect. 3 years ago, Vextar began, the human race joined our council. At that time, many questioned whether your people were ready for such responsibility. You were young, aggressive, and had only just learned to travel between stars. Hyun-woo kept his face calm, but inside he felt a flash of anger. Humans had proven themselves over and over. They had shared their technology freely. They had sent ships to help protect council worlds from pirates and raiders. They had given food and medical supplies to colonies that were struggling. However, Vextar continued, you have shown us that we were wrong to doubt you. Human ships have served with honor in our fleets. Human scientists have shared discoveries that have helped all of us. Human diplomats have helped solve conflicts between member races. The chamber filled with sounds that might have been applause from dozens of different species. Some clapped like humans. Others made clicking sounds or musical tones. A few species glowed brighter for a moment. Today, Vextar said, raising one long arm, we offer humanity its greatest honor yet. The mining world of Kepler 442c has sent a request for help. Pirates have been attacking their ships and threatening their colonies. The council has decided to send a fleet to protect them. Hyun-woo felt his heart beat faster. This was what he had hoped for, a chance for humans to lead their own mission, to show the galaxy that Earth's children could stand on their own. Admiral Kim, Vextar said, looking directly at him, the council asks you to take command of this mission. You will lead a combined fleet to Kepler 442c and drive away these raiders. This will be humanity's first independent commanding council. Space. The chamber erupted in sounds of approval. Hyun-woo felt pride swell in his chest. This was the moment Earth had been working toward for 3 years. Finally, they would be equals among the stars. I accept this honor, Hyun-woo said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's sound system. The human fleet will not fail. The Council's trust. Vexstar smiled, showing teeth that were too white and too sharp. I know you will not disappoint us, Admiral. The people of Kepler 442c are counting on you. After the ceremony, Hyun-woo met with his officers in a private room. The walls were made of some kind of transparent metal that showed the stars outside Nexus Station. Ships from dozens of worlds moved past like slow fish in a vast ocean. How many ships do we get? Asked Captain Minho Jang. He was Hyun-woo's oldest friend and the commander of the battleship Indomitable. His square face showed the same excitement that Hyun-woo felt. 12 battleships, Hyun-woo said, reading from the datapad Vexstar had given him. 30 cruisers and 40 destroyers. Plus support ships and transports. It's the largest human fleet ever assembled. 50,000 crew members, added Commander Yoon-ji Choi, looking at her own notes. She was young but had already proven herself as one of the best tactical officers in the human fleet. All volunteers. All ready to show the galaxy what we can do. Ambassador Park was also there, though she looked less excited than the military officers. Are we sure about this? She asked quietly. It seems like a big responsibility for our first independent mission. That's exactly why it's perfect, Hyun-woo said. The Council is finally treating us as equals. They trust us to handle this on our own. Outside the window, a human ship moved past. The UES Determination was one of Earth's newest battleships. Its gray hull was covered with the symbols of the United Earthspace Navy. Seeing it made Hyun-woo feel proud of how far humanity had come. 3 years ago, humans had been alone in the galaxy. They had just learned to travel faster than light. They knew nothing about the dozens of races that filled the space between stars. Now they were part of something bigger. They had friends and allies across hundreds of worlds. When do we leave? Captain Jang asked. 2 days, Hyun-woo replied. That gives us time to brief all the ship commanders and make sure everyone knows the mission. We jump to Kepler 442c and deal with these pirates quickly and cleanly. What do we know about the enemy? Commander Choi asked. Hyun-woo looked at the files again. Not much. They've been hitting mining ships and small settlements. The attack started about 6 months ago. The local security forces can't handle them alone. Sounds simple enough, Captain Jang said with a grin. Ambassador Park still looked worried. I just hope we're ready for this. The other races have been fighting in space for thousands of years. We've only been out here for 3. That's why this matters so much, Hyun-woo said firmly. We need to prove that humans belong here, that we can protect Council worlds just as well as anyone else. 2 days later, the human fleet gathered at the edge of Council space. 82 ships hung in the darkness like sleeping giants. Each one carried the hopes of Earth and the dreams of 6 billion humans who looked up at the stars and wondered what was waiting for them. Hyun-woo stood on the bridge of his flagship, UES Retribution. Through the main screen he could see the other ships of his fleet. They were beautiful and terrible at the same time. Built for war but carrying the promise of peace. All ships report ready, Admiral, Commander Choi said from her station. Signal the fleet, Hyun-woo ordered. All ships prepare for a hyperspace jump. Destination, Kepler 442c system. The stars outside began to shift as the ship's engines prepared to tear a hole in space itself. In a few moments, they would be traveling faster than light toward their destiny. Jump in 10 seconds. The navigation officer called out. Hyun-woo felt the familiar tingle in his stomach as the hyperspace drive engaged. The stars outside turned into lines of light, then vanished entirely. The human fleet was on its way to prove that Earth's children deserved their place among the stars. None of them knew. They were flying into a trap that would change everything. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442c system. Admiral Hyun-woo Kim expected to see a peaceful mining world with maybe a few small raider ships causing trouble. Instead, his blood turned cold at what the sensors showed him. Admiral, Commander Yoon-ji Choi's voice was tight with shock. I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the system. These aren't small raiders. The main screen lit up with contact markers. Hundreds of them. Ships that were clearly military vessels, not the small pirates they had been told to expect. Worse, the signatures matched Council fleet designs. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "I'm picking up distress signals from the planet." "But they're old signals, at least 6 hours old." Fan-Wu felt ice form in his stomach, put it on speakers. The bridge filled with the sound of terror and death. Human voices screaming for help. The sound of explosions. Then suddenly silence. "The planet's not responding to our calls," the communications officer said quietly. I think everyone down there is dead." Captain Minho Jiang's voice came over the fleet channel from his battleship. "Admiral, my sensors are showing massive fleet formations moving to surround us. These ships are flying Council colors, but their weapon systems are hot." Through the main screen, Hyung-woo could see them now. Massive warships that belonged to the species that were supposed to be humanity's allies. Altarian battle cruisers, hegemony dreadnoughts. Ships from a dozen different Council races, all moving into attack positions around the human fleet. "This has to be a mistake," Ambassador Park said. She had insisted on coming with the fleet to handle any diplomatic issues. Now she looked pale and frightened. "Contact them. Ask what's happening." Before Hyun-woo could respond, the enemy fleet opened fire. The space around the human ships exploded with energy beams and missile trails. The Council ships had been waiting for them, positioned perfectly to catch the human fleet in a deadly crossfire. "All ships, evasive action." Han-woo shouted into his command microphone. "Return fire, protect the fleet." The UES Retribution shook as enemy beams struck its shields. Warning lights flashed red across the bridge. Through the chaos, Hyun-woo could see his other ships trying to fight back, but they were outnumbered. 5-1. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the enemy flagship," the communications officer reported. "Put it through." The main screen flickered, then showed the bridge of an alien warship. General Quindara of the hegemony stood there, his forearms crossed over his armored chest. His insect-like face showed no emotion as he spoke. "Admiral Kim," Quindara's translated voice was calm and cold. "You are guilty of attacking innocent civilians and threatening Council security. Surrender now, and some of your crews might survive." "What are you talking about?" Hyun-woo shouted back. "We came here to help defend this world." The Council sent. "U.S.?" Quindara's compound eyes glittered. "The Council sent you nowhere, human. Your species has been declared a threat to galactic peace. Your ships went rogue and attacked civilian targets. We are here to stop you." The transmission cut off. Around them, more human ships were dying. The destroyer UES Courageous exploded. In a ball of fire and metal, the cruiser used Steadfast was cut in half by a concentrated beam attack. "They're lying," Commander Choi said, her hands flying over her control panel. "The attack on the planet happened before we even got here. The timestamps on the distress calls prove it." "Record everything," Hyun-woo ordered. "Every transmission, every sensor reading. If any of us survive this, Earth needs to know what really happened here. The battle was hopeless from the start. The human ships fought bravely, but they had walked into a carefully planned trap. The Council fleet had overwhelming numbers and the advantage of position. One by one, Earth's ships were being destroyed. Captain Jiang's voice came through the communications, barely audible through the static of battle damage. "Admiral, my ship is heavily damaged. Engines are failing, weapons are offline. But I still have life support and one working thruster." Hyun-woo could see the Indomitable on his screen. The proud battleship was a wreck, its hull torn open and bleeding atmosphere into space. But it was still moving, slowly turning toward the largest enemy ship. "Minho, what are you doing?" Hyun-woo asked, though he already knew the answer. "What we came here to do, sir." "Protect innocent people." Captain Jiang's voice was calm now, almost peaceful. "Tell my wife I kept my promise. Tell her I made it count." The Indomitable accelerated toward the enemy flagship, using its last thruster to build up speed. The Council ships tried to stop it, pouring fire into the dying battleship, but it was too late. Captain Zhang had already set his course. The collision lit up space like a new star. The Indomitable struck the enemy flagship just behind the bridge, its hull filled with explosive fuel and ammunition. Both ships vanished in a massive explosion that temporarily blinded every sensor in the system. "3 cruisers are breaking free of the engagement," Commander Choi reported, tears running down her face. "The UES Defiant, UES Relentless, and UES Fearless. They're damaged but still able to jump to hyperspace." "Order them to run," Hyan-Woo said. "Get back to Earth? Tell them what happened here." His own ship was dying around him. Half the bridge stations were offline, and he could smell smoke from fires burning deeper in the ship. Through the main screen, he could see enemy ships closing in for the final attack. "Admiral," the communications officer said weakly, "I'm still recording. Everything is being transmitted to the escape ships in real time." "Good." Hyan-Woo stood up from his command chair, straightening his uniform one last time. "Continue recording. Let Earth see how we died." The enemy ships surrounded the few remaining human vessels. General Quindara's face appeared on the screen again. "This is what happens to species that threaten the peace of the galaxy," he said. "Let this be a lesson to any who would follow humanity's path." The only lesson here," Hyan-Woo replied, looking directly into the camera, "is that trust is a luxury we can no longer afford. You wanted us to be sheep, but sheep don't survive in a galaxy full of wolves." The final barrage struck the UES Retribution from 6 different directions. The ship's hull cracked like an egg, and the bridge began to lose atmosphere. As the air rushed out, Hyan-Woo managed to speak one last message. "Tell them we kept faith," he gasped into the microphone. "Even when they broke theirs." The ship exploded moments later, taking Admiral Hyan-Woo Kim and the dreams of peaceful cooperation with it across the system. The last few human ships died in flashes of light and metal. Of the 82 vessels that had arrived so proudly, only 3 escaped. Of the 50,000 crew members who had volunteered to serve the Council, only 847 survived. The 3 damaged cruisers limped away from the battle site, their hulls scarred and their crews traumatized. In their databanks they carried complete recordings of the massacre, proof that the Council had lied, that the attack on Kepler 442c had been planned, and that humanity's trust had been repaid with betrayal and murder. Commander Subin Lee, the senior surviving officer, stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant and watched the burning wreckage fall behind them. Her ship was barely holding together, but it would make it back to Earth. "Ma'am," her communications officer said, "we're receiving a council-wide broadcast. They're announcing that human raiders attacked Kepler 442c and that Council forces successfully stopped the attack." "They're calling us the raiders," Commander Lee said quietly. "They're telling the galaxy that we were the criminals. What do we do, ma'am?" Commander Lee looked at the recordings they carried. The proof of humanity's innocence and the Council's betrayal. Evidence that would change everything when it reached Earth. "We go home," she said. "We tell the truth, and then we let Earth decide what happens next." As the 3 ships jumped to hyperspace, they left behind the wreckage of humanity's trust in the galaxy. The Council had taught them a lesson they would never forget. In space, there were no friends, only enemies who hadn't revealed themselves yet. Behind them, the Council fleet began cleaning up the battle site. They destroyed the human wreckage and removed any evidence of what had really happened. Soon, there would be no trace that humanity had ever been betrayed, but they had missed something. The 3 escape ships carried more than just recordings. They carried the rage and grief of a species that had learned the most dangerous lesson in the galaxy. Trust was weakness. Mercy was foolishness. And the only way to survive among the stars was to become more terrible than anything that threatened you. Earth was about to learn that lesson very well. The 3 damaged ships arrived at Earth 2 weeks after the massacre at Kepler 442c. Commander Subin Lee's vessels limped into the Sol system like wounded animals seeking shelter. Their hulls were scarred with burn marks from enemy weapons, Several sections were sealed off because of hull breaches. The crews looked like ghosts. President Daeho Lim received the first transmission while he was in his office overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The sun was setting, painting the water gold and red. In a few minutes, those same colors would represent something far more terrible. Mr. President, Commander Lee's voice was hollow and exhausted. I need to speak with you immediately. What I have to tell you will change everything. Within an hour, the emergency session of the Terran Senate had been called. Representatives from every nation on Earth gathered in the Great Hall in Geneva. The room had been built to celebrate human unity and cooperation. Now it would witness the death of humanity's innocence. Ambassador So Young Park sat at the witness table. She had survived the massacre, though barely. Her left arm was in a medical brace, and she moved carefully because of broken ribs. But her eyes burned with an anger that seemed to light up the room. They murdered them, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. 50,000 people who believed in peace and cooperation. 50,000 people who trusted the council to keep their word. The recording began to play on the massive screens around the chamber. Every senator, every representative, every observer watched as the trap was sprung at Kepler 442c. They saw Admiral Kim's proud fleet arrive to help defend innocent people. They saw the council ships waiting in ambush. They heard General Quindara's lies about human aggression. When Captain Zhang's ship exploded in its final heroic ramming attack, several senators began to cry. When Admiral Kim spoke his last words about keeping faith, the entire chamber fell silent. This is not the end of the recording, Ambassador Park said quietly. After our ships were destroyed, we intercepted council communications. They celebrated. They congratulated each other on a successful operation. They discussed how to divide up Earth's former territory once we were completely destroyed. Senator Tae-min Yoon from the Military Affairs Committee stood up. His face was pale with rage. How long have they been planning this? At least 2 years, Commander Lee answered from her seat at the witness table. The attack on the colonists at Kepler 442c happened 6 hours before our fleet even arrived. They killed 200,000 innocent people just to make their lie more believable. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Representatives shouted questions and demands for action. President Lim had to call for order several times before the noise died down. The question now, President Lim said, is what we do about this betrayal. Ambassador Park tried to speak, but her voice was drowned out by the angry crowd. She waited for quiet, then tried again. We can still find a diplomatic solution, she said, though she sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as anyone else. We can present this evidence to the other council members. Some of them might not have known about the plan. Diplomatic solution? Senator Yoon's voice was sharp with disbelief. They just murdered 50,000 of our people and called us criminals. They're probably preparing to attack Earth right now. Dr. Haijing Kong from the Weapons Research Division stood up. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but when she spoke, everyone listened. The council has already begun their next phase, she said, holding up a datapad. Our intelligence network has intercepted orders going out to all council member species. They're being told to prepare for a pacification operation against Earth. They plan to destroy our military completely and reduce us to a primitive farming world. The chamber fell silent again. The weight of the situation was finally becoming clear to everyone. How long do we have? President Lim asked. 6 months, maybe 8, Dr. Kong replied. They need time to gather their forces and coordinate with dozens of different species. But when they come, they'll come with everything they have? General Ji-hoon Seo, the commander of Earth's remaining military forces, stood up from his seat in the front row. He was a tall man with scars on his face from an accident during the early days of space exploration. Mr. President, he said formally, I request permission to activate the Reckoning Protocol. Every person in the chamber knew what that meant. The Reckoning Protocol was Earth's most classified military program. It had been created in secret during the first year of contact with alien races. when some military leaders worried that humanity might need to defend itself against species that had been fighting wars for thousands of years. General, President Lim said carefully, the Reckoning Protocol was designed as a last resort. It would transform our entire civilization into a military state. With respect, sir, General Sco replied, our civilization is about to be destroyed. If we don't act now, there won't be anything left to protect. Ambassador Park stood up, swaying slightly from her injuries. There has to be another way. We can't just abandon everything we've worked for. We can't become like them. They've already made us like them, Senator Yoon said coldly. The moment they decided to murder our people, they forced us to choose between survival and extinction. Dr. Kang activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. It showed Earth's industrial capacity in glowing blue lines. Shipyards, factories, research stations, mining operations on the Moon and Mars. The Reckoning Protocol would convert all of this to military production, she explained. Every factory would build weapons. Every shipyard would produce warships. Every research station would develop new ways to kill our enemies. How many ships could we build? General? CO asked. In 6 months, with full industrial conversion? Dr. Kang's fingers danced over her controls, and the display changed to show projected fleet numbers. 2,000 warships. Maybe more if we use the new automated construction systems. The numbers were staggering. Earth's current military had fewer than 50 ships. The Council fleet that had destroyed Admiral Kim's forces had numbered in the hundreds. But 2,000 ships would be larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. What about weapons? Senator Yoon asked. Dr. Kang smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. We've been developing new technologies in secret for 3 years, weapons that the Council races have never seen. Kinetic kill vehicles that can destroy a ship with a single hit. Energy beams that can cut through any known armor. And other things that might violate galactic law. There's no galactic law anymore, President Lim said quietly. Not for us. They broke every treaty, every agreement, every promise they made to humanity. The vote was called 2 hours later. The representatives of Earth's 6 billion people had to decide the future of their species. Would they try to find a peaceful solution to the Council's betrayal? Or would they transform their entire civilization into a weapon of war? The result was overwhelming. Only 12 representatives voted against the Reckoning Protocol. Everyone else had seen the recordings from Kepler 442c. Everyone else understood what the Council planned to do to Earth. President Lim stood at the podium as the votes were counted. Behind him, the flags of every nation on Earth hung motionless in the still air. Soon, those flags would be replaced by the banners of a single, unified military state. By the power granted to me by this emergency session, he announced, I hereby activate the Reckoning Protocol. As of this moment, the Republic of Earth is dissolved. In its place, we establish the Terran Defense Union, dedicated to the survival of humanity and the protection of human interests throughout the galaxy. The transformation began immediately. Around the world, factories stopped producing civilian goods and began building weapons. Shipyards that had been making exploration vessels started constructing warships. Scientists abandoned peaceful research and focused on creating new ways to destroy their enemies. The most dramatic change happened in Earth schools. Children who had been learning about cooperation and peace with alien races now studied military tactics and weapons design. The textbooks that had praised the Council's wisdom were burned and replaced with manuals on combat and survival. Admiral Dong Hyun Kim, the younger brother of the murdered Admiral Hyun Woo Kim, was put in charge of the new fleet construction program. He had been a peaceful man before the massacre, more interested in exploration than warfare. Now his eyes burned with the same cold fire that had consumed his older brother. They wanted us to trust them, he said during his first public speech. They wanted us to believe that we could all live together in peace. They taught us a valuable lesson about trust. He paused, looking directly into the cameras that were broadcasting his words across Earth and to the few human colonies in other systems. Trust is a luxury that only the strong can afford. Since we are not strong enough to trust, we will become strong enough that no one dares to threaten us. 6 months later, the Council's invasion fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system. They expected to find a frightened world defended by a few dozen obsolete ships. Instead, they found something that would haunt their nightmares for generations to come. Earth had become a fortress. The planet was surrounded by rings of weapon, platforms that could destroy incoming ships from millions of 18 months after the massacre at Kepler 442c, Earth was no longer the same planet. From space, it looked like a weapon wrapped in blue and green. Massive orbital rings circled the world, each one bristling with enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. The moon had been transformed from a peaceful research station into the largest military fortress in human history. Admiral Ji-hoon SCO stood on the observation deck of the newly completed Titan shipyard, watching the construction of humanity's newest battleship. The UES Nemesis was 3 times larger than any ship Earth had built before the betrayal. Its black hull was covered with weapon systems that had never been seen in galactic warfare. "How many ships now?" he asked Dr. Haijin Kong, who was reviewing construction reports on her datapad. 2,437 completed warships, she answered. Another 600 in various stages of construction. The automated shipyards are working at maximum capacity. Dr. Kang looked older than she had 18 months ago. Her hair was completely gray now, and her eyes held the tired expression of someone who had seen too much. But her voice was steady as she continued her report. The new weapon systems are performing beyond expectations. The kinetic kill vehicles can punch through any known armor. The quantum torpedoes can track targets through hyperspace, and the stellar lance energy weapons. She paused, looking uncomfortable. They can crack a planet's crust from orbit. Admiral SEO nodded grimly. Before the betrayal, such weapons would have horrified him. Now they were just tools to ensure humanity's survival. "What about the Shadow Fleet?" he asked Admiral Dong Hyen. "Kim's Black Operations ships are ready for deployment. 50 vessels designed for deep strikes behind enemy lines. They're equipped with cloaking systems and weapons specifically designed to cause maximum terror." Through the massive window they could see Mars in the distance. The red planet was now covered with industrial complexes that never stopped working. Day and night the factories produced ammunition, armor, and the countless components needed to keep humanity's war machine running. "Sir," a young officer approached them with urgent news. "We're receiving reports from our intelligence network. The Council is moving against us sooner than expected." Captain Subin Lee had been promoted to head of military intelligence after surviving the Kepler 442c massacre. Her network of spies and informants had spread throughout Council space, gathering information about their former allies' plans. "Show me," Admiral SEO ordered, the wall screen activated, showing a map of local space. Red markers indicated Council fleet movements, and there were far too many of them. "A Council enforcement fleet has been assembled at the Proxima staging area," the intelligence officer reported. 40 ships from 6 different species. They're calling it a police action to restore order to human space. 40 ships? Dr. Kong mused. They still don't understand what they're dealing with. Admiral SAO smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "Where are they heading?" "The Mars shipping lane, sir. They plan to blockade our trade routes and force us to surrender." "Perfect." Admiral SEO activated his communication system. "All fleet commanders, this is Admiral SEO. Prepare for Operation Iron Hand. The Council has decided to test our resolve." Within hours, the Terran Defense Fleet was moving. Unlike the old human ships that had relied on diplomacy and cooperation, these new vessels were built for one purpose: destruction. They moved through space like sharks. Sensing blood in the water, the Council enforcement fleet arrived at Mars, expecting to find a few desperate human ships trying to protect civilian trade vessels. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by 200 Terran warships that had been waiting for them in the asteroid belt. Admiral Donghain Kim commanded the human response from his flagship, the UES Retribution's Edge, the ship was named after his murdered brother's vessel, and it carried weapons that would have been considered war crimes in the old galactic community. Council Fleet, this is Admiral Kim of the Terran Defense Force, he broadcast on all frequencies. You have entered human space with hostile intent. You have 30 seconds to withdraw or you will be destroyed. The Council Commander, a proud Altarian named Fleet Leader Corvash, responded with the arrogance that had cost humanity so dearly 18 months before. Human vessels, you are in violation of galactic law. Surrender immediately and your crews will be treated according to the standards of civilized warfare. Admiral Kim's laugh was cold as winter space. Civilized warfare? You mean like the civilized way you murdered 50,000 of our people? The civilized way you planned to turn Earth into a farming colony? The transmission cut off. The Council ships began powering their weapons, expecting a traditional space battle with energy beams and missile exchanges. They had fought wars this way for thousands of years, following rules and conventions that made conflict almost ceremonial. What happened next lasted exactly 6 minutes and 43 seconds. The human ships didn't fire energy beams or launch missiles. Instead, they released clouds of metal projectiles accelerated to incredible speeds by magnetic coils. The kinetic kill vehicles moved too fast for the Council ship's defensive systems to track. The first Council ship, a massive hegemony dreadnought, simply disappeared. One moment it was there, the next it was expanding cloud of metal fragments and atmospheric gases. The projectile had struck it with so much force that the entire vessel had been converted to plasma. The other Council ships tried to return fire, but the human vessels were using new tactics that no galactic military had ever seen. They attacked from multiple directions simultaneously, using coordinated strikes that overwhelmed enemy defenses. Their shields could absorb energy weapon fire, but they didn't rely on shields alone. They used speed, maneuvering, and overwhelming firepower. The quantum torpedoes were the most terrifying new weapon. Unlike normal missiles, they could track targets through hyperspace jumps. Council ships that tried to retreat found the torpedoes following them, exploding inside their hulls after materializing in their engine rooms. But the stellar lance weapons were what finally broke the Council fleet's will to fight. The massive energy beams didn't just destroy ships, they vaporized them completely, leaving no wreckage behind. It was as if the vessels had never existed at all. Fleet Leader Corvash found himself commanding the only surviving Council ship. His proud fleet of 40 vessels had been reduced to a single damaged cruiser in less than 7 minutes. "Please," he broadcast desperately, "we surrender. We didn't know. We didn't understand." Admiral Kim's response was broadcast throughout the system, recorded by every ship and monitoring station for thousands of kilometers around. "You understand now?" he said quietly. "Tell your Council masters what you learned here today. Tell them that humanity remembers every betrayal, every murdered crew member, every broken promise. Tell them that we are no longer the species that begged for acceptance among the stars." The surviving Council ship was allowed to leave, carrying its traumatized crew and the message that would spread throughout galactic civilization. The wreckage of the other 39 ships was left in orbit around Mars, a graveyard visible from Earth itself. News of the battle spread through Council space faster than light-speed communication networks could carry it. The species that had considered humans to be primitive and manageable suddenly realized they had created something far more dangerous than they had imagined. Emergency sessions were called on every Council world. Military leaders who had dismissed humanity as a minor threat began demanding massive fleet mobilizations. Some species started building defensive fortifications around their home systems. But on Earth, the reaction was very different. In the cities and towns across the planet, people watched the battle recordings with satisfaction rather than horror. Children who had grown up hearing stories about the Kepler 442c massacre cheered when the Council ships were destroyed. President Lim addressed the world from his office, the same room where he had received news of the massacre 18 months before, but now the Pacific Ocean outside his window reflected the lights of orbital weapon platforms. Today we sent a message to the galaxy, he said calmly. We are no longer the trusting species that believed in cooperation and mutual respect. We are what they made us, a civilization dedicated to survival at any cost. He paused, looking directly into the camera that was broadcasting his words to 6 billion humans and countless alien intelligence networks. They wanted us to be sheep. But sheep don't survive when surrounded by wolves. So we became something else. We became the thing that wolves fear in the darkness. The transformation of human civilization was now complete. Earth's children had learned the hardest lesson the galaxy could teach. Trust was a luxury that only the strong could afford, and mercy was a weakness that led to extinction. The Council had betrayed humanity once. They would not get a second. Chance. In the months that followed, more Council enforcement fleets would arrive in human space. Each one would be destroyed more quickly and efficiently than the last. Each battle would teach the galaxy the same lesson. Humanity was no longer asking for its place among the stars. It was taking that place by force. And anyone who stood in the way would be removed from existence entirely. The golden age of cooperation was over. 2 years after the massacre at Kepler 442c, humanity struck back with a fury that shook the foundations of galactic civilization. The Shadow Fleet, 50 black ships commanded by Admiral Donghyun Kim, launched from hidden bases beyond the edge of human space. Their mission was simple: teach the Council that betraying Earth came with a price that would be paid in blood and terror. The first target was the Nexus Station trade hub, where humanity had once sent diplomats to beg for acceptance. Among the stars. Now it would burn as a monument to the Council's treachery. Captain the Jin-O commanded the lead ship, used Dark Vengeance. Her vessel was unlike anything that had ever existed in galactic warfare. It was completely black, absorbing light and sensor beams instead of reflecting them. When it moved through space, it was virtually invisible until it opened fire. Target in sight, O reported to Admiral Kim's flagship. Nexus Station shows no sign they've detected our approach. The station was massive, built to handle trade. Ships from hundreds of different worlds. Millions of alien beings lived and worked there, processing the goods that kept the Council's economy running. Before the betrayal, human merchants had been welcome there. Now it would become a graveyard. Remember the mission parameters, Admiral Kim broadcast to all Shadow Fleet ships. We're not here to conquer territory. We're here to make them afraid. Fear is the only language the Council understands now. The attack began at exactly 0300 station time, when most of the population was asleep. The Shadow Fleet emerged from their cloaking fields like nightmares materializing in the darkness. Their weapons were not designed to destroy the station quickly. They were designed to create the maximum amount of terror and chaos. The first strikes hit the station's power grid and communication systems. The lights went out across the massive structure, and the emergency systems began screaming warnings in dozens of different languages. Panic spread through the corridors as millions of beings realized they were under attack. This is Captain O of the Terran Defense Force, she broadcast on all emergency frequencies. We are here to collect payment for the 50,000 humans murdered at Kepler 442c. Every being who dies tonight dies because the Council chose betrayal over honor. The station's defense fleet consisted of 12 light cruisers, more than enough to handle pirates or raiders, but completely inadequate against humanity's new warships. The Council ships tried to fight back, but their weapons could barely scratch the Shadow Fleet's advanced armor, one by one. The defense ships were disabled rather than destroyed. Their crews were left alive to watch as the human ships systematically tore apart everything they had been sworn to protect. The attack lasted 4 hours. When it was over, Nexus Station was a broken wreck drifting in space. Its trade networks were destroyed, its industrial facilities were slag, and its population was scattered to emergency escape pods. The economic heart of 3 star systems had been ripped out in a single night, but Admiral Kim's message was just beginning. Over the next 6 months, the Shadow Fleet struck at 17 different targets throughout Council space. Mining operations, industrial worlds, shipping hubs, anything that kept the Council's economy running became a target for human vengeance. The attacks followed the same pattern each time. The Shadow Fleet would appear without warning, destroy the military defenses, and then systematically dismantle the economic infrastructure. Civilian populations were usually allowed to evacuate, but their homes and livelihoods were left in ruins. Colonel Woojin Park led the ground operations when the Shadow Fleet needed to capture facilities rather than destroy them. His Marines were equipped with powered armor and weapons that made them nearly unstoppable against conventional forces. "We're not conquering these worlds," he explained to his troops before each mission. "We're making examples of them. Every alien who sees what we can do will understand that humanity is no longer asking for its place in the galaxy." The Council's response was swift and brutal. Unable to catch the Shadow Fleet, they turned their fury on human civilian targets. The agricultural world of New Eden was the first to burn. The planet had been settled by families who wanted to live peaceful lives growing food for Earth's expanding population. They had no military defenses, no weapons more dangerous than farming equipment. When the Council fleet arrived, the colonists tried to surrender. General Quindara, the same hegemony commander who had led the massacre at Kepler 442c, was in charge of the attack. His ships surrounded New Eden and began bombarding it from orbit, turning farmland into burning wasteland and cities into craters. 3 million human civilians died in the bombardment. Men and children who had never fired a shot in anger were vaporized by energy beams designed to crack planetary crusts. The few survivors were left to starve among the radioactive ruins of their world. The news reached Earth within hours. President Lim appeared on every communication network across human space, his face showing an anger that seemed to burn through the screen itself. "The Council has chosen to target innocent civilians," he announced. "They have decided that murdering families and children is an acceptable response to our military actions. Very well, they have taught us another valuable lesson about the nature of galactic civilization." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was completely calm and cold. "From this moment forward, the Terran Defense Force will no longer distinguish between military and civilian targets. The Council wanted total war. They will have it." The response came 12 hours later. Admiral Donghayan Kim's fleet appeared in the home system of the Vorthan hegemony, the species that had carried out the New Eden massacre. Unlike the previous Shadow Fleet operations, this was not a surgical strike against economic targets. This was extermination. The human fleet had grown since the early days of the Shadow operations. 200 ships now followed Admiral Kim's flagship, each one armed with weapons that could sterilize entire continents. They arranged themselves in a perfect sphere around the Vorthan homeworld. "People of the hegemony," Admiral Kim broadcast. "To the planet below, your leaders ordered the murder of 3 million innocent humans. Your General Quindara personally oversaw the destruction of families and children who posed no threat to your species. You celebrated their deaths. A planetary defense fleet tried to stop what was coming, but they were swept aside like leaves in a hurricane. Human ships cut through their formations with contemptuous ease, leaving wreckage scattered across the system. We gave you the stars," Admiral Kim continued, his voice carrying to every receiver on the planet. "We shared our technology, our knowledge, our friendship. You repaid us with betrayal and murder. Now you will learn what happens to species that declare war on humanity." What followed would be remembered as the Vorthan Holocaust, the first time in galactic history that an entire civilization was deliberately extinguished. The human fleet used stellar lance weapons to burn away the planet's atmosphere, then followed up with kinetic bombardments that cracked the crust itself. 8 billion Vorthan beings died in the space of 6 hours. Their homeworld was left as a lifeless rock, its surface glowing with residual heat from the bombardment. No monument was left, no record of their civilization. They were simply erased from existence. The recordings of the attack were broadcast throughout Council space on every communication frequency. The message was clear. This was what happened to species that murdered human civilians. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Panic spread through the Council like a plague. Species that had never heard of Earth before the betrayal suddenly found themselves fortifying their home systems and building bunkers deep underground. Emergency sessions were called on every council world. Military leaders who had dismissed humanity as a minor threat now demanded massive fleet mobilizations to stop what they were calling the human plague before it spread further, but it was already too late. The Shadow Fleet operations had crippled the Council's economy, and the destruction of the Vorthan homeworld had shattered their military morale. Fleet after fleet was assembled to strike at human space, but each one was destroyed before it could reach its target. The quantum torpedoes that could track ships through hyperspace made retreat impossible. The kinetic kill vehicles that moved too fast to dodge made traditional fleet tactics useless. The stellar lance weapons that could vaporize entire vessels made the idea of honorable combat obsolete. Humanity had become something that the galaxy had never seen before, a species that fought not for territory or resources, but for the complete destruction of its enemies. They took no prisoners, signed no treaties, and showed no mercy to anyone who had participated in the betrayal on Earth. The reaction to the Vorthan Holocaust was celebration rather than horror. In the cities and towns across the planet, people gathered to watch the recordings of their enemies' destruction. Children who had grown up hearing stories about the New Eden massacre cheered when the alien homeworld burned. "This is what justice looks like," President Lim told the celebrating crowds. "This is what happens when you declare war on humanity and murder our families. We will hunt down every species that participated in our betrayal, and we will erase them from the galaxy entirely." The transformation was complete. Humanity had become the thing that civilized species fear. 3 years after the massacre that started it all, the Galactic Council made their final desperate gamble. They assembled the largest military force in recorded galactic history, the grand fleet of 40 different species, over 3,000 warships commanded by the finest military minds from across Council Space. Fleet Admiral Zexandra of the Crystalline Consortium stood on the bridge of the massive command ship UCS Eternal Unity, watching her fleet prepare for hyperspace jump. Ships stretched out in every direction, a forest of metal and energy that represented the combined might of dozens of civilizations. "This has to end," she said to her war council, representatives from every major council species. "The humans have become a plague that threatens all civilized life. If we don't stop them here, they'll exterminate every species in the galaxy." The humans had given them no choice. After the destruction of the Vorthan homeworld, human fleets had appeared in system after system, burning worlds and erasing entire civilizations from existence. The Shadow Fleet operations had crippled the Council's economy. Terror and panic spread through their space like wildfire. "Intelligence reports indicate the human fleet is massing in the Shattered Nebula," reported General Kethver of the Altarian Strategic Command. "They're using the nebula's energy fields to hide their exact numbers, but we estimate no more than 500 ships." Fleet Admiral Zexandra nodded. Even if the humans had 500 ships, the Grand Fleet outnumbered 6 to 1. This would be the battle that ended humanity's threat once and for all. What she didn't know was that humanity had learned to use fear as a weapon more powerful than any energy beam or missile barrage. In the Shattered Nebula, Fleet Admiral Insu Beak of the Terran Defense Force stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UES Retribution's Dawn. Around him, the human fleet waited in perfect formation among the swirling energy clouds that gave the nebula its name. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "Council fleet detected at the edge of sensor range, confirming 3,000-plus vessels, exactly as our intelligence predicted." Admiral Beak was a veteran of every major engagement since the betrayal. He had been present at the Mars blockade battle, had commanded ships during the Shadow Fleet operations, and had personally overseen the orbital bombardment that ended the Vorthan species. His face showed no emotion as he processed the numbers. "They still don't understand," he said quietly. "They think this is about ships and firepower. They think they can win through superior numbers." Captain Eugene Lim, commander of the Special Operations Squadron, looked up from her displays. "What are your orders, sir?" "Signal all ships," Admiral Beak said. Implement Doctrine 7. Show them what we've learned about warfare since they taught us that mercy is weakness. The Council fleet entered the shattered nebula expecting a traditional space battle. Energy beams and missile exchanges. Ships maneuvering for advantage while following the established rules of galactic warfare. They had fought this way for thousands of years. What they got instead was something that violated every convention of civilized combat. The human ships didn't arrange themselves in neat battle lines or fight for positional advantage. Instead, they attacked like a swarm of predators, using tactics that seemed to ignore their own safety entirely. Suicide ramming attacks at near-light speed turned human ships into kinetic weapons that could destroy vessels 10 times their size. AI-controlled drone ships flew directly into enemy formations, their hulls packed with explosives that could vaporize everything within a kilometer radius. "They're not fighting to win," Fleet Admiral Zexandra said in horror as she watched her. Beautiful formations torn apart by human ships that seemed determined to die as long as they could take enemies with them. "They're fighting to kill as many of us as possible." But the worst weapons were the ones that targeted life instead of ships. The Reaper nanobots were microscopic machines that could eat through any known armor, then spread throughout a ship's life support systems. Crews would watch in terror as their own air became poisonous, their water supplies turned deadly, and their food began consuming them from the inside. Admiral Donghain Kim commanded the human left flank from his ship U's Dark Retribution. His formation struck at the Council fleet's supply vessels, not to capture them but to demonstrate what happened to species that declared war on humanity. "Target their hospital ships," he ordered coldly. "Target their supply transports. Target everything that keeps their fleet alive. Show them that there are no non-combatants in a war of extinction." The weapons that humanity had developed were designed not just to kill, but to create the maximum amount of terror and despair. Energy beams that could target life support systems directly, leaving crews to suffocate in their own ships. Quantum viruses that could infect computer systems and turn them against their operators. Captain So Min-cha led the human right flank, her ships equipped with the newest terror weapons. Stellar lance arrays that could slice capital ships in half with surgical precision. Gravitational mines that could create miniature black holes, consuming everything within their event horizons. "Remember," she broadcast to her squadron, "we're not here to defeat them. We're here to make sure that every survivor carries the memory of this day back to their home worlds. We want them to wake up screaming about what humans can do." The battle lasted 3 days. When it ended, the space around the shattered nebula was filled with the wreckage of the largest military force in galactic history. Of the 3,000 Council ships that had entered the system, fewer than 200 escaped. Most of those were damaged beyond repair, their crews traumatized by weapons and tactics they had never imagined. Human losses. 12 ships. The survivors who limped back to Council space carried stories that would haunt the galaxy for generations. They spoke of human weapons that could turn matter into energy, of ships that fought like living creatures seeking prey, of crews that preferred death to retreat. But the most terrifying reports were about the humans themselves. Intercepts of human communications during the battle showed that they were not fighting in anger or hatred. They were calm, methodical, and completely without mercy. They discussed the extermination of entire species the way other races might discuss weather patterns. "They've become something else," reported one surviving Council captain. "They're not fighting for territory or resources. They're fighting to remove us from existence entirely. And they're enjoying it." The news of the Grand Fleet's destruction spread through Council space faster than light-speed communications could carry it. The species that had considered themselves the masters of the galaxy suddenly realized that they had created something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Emergency councils were called on every major world. Some species began evacuating their home systems entirely, fleeing to the outer rim where they hoped humanity would never find them. Others started building massive defensive fortifications, though everyone knew such measures would be useless against weapons that could crack planets. A few species attempted to surrender, broadcasting messages toward human space offering complete submission in exchange for survival. These messages received no response. Humanity was no longer interested in surrender or negotiation. On Earth, the reaction to the victory was celebration that lasted for weeks. The population that had lived in fear of Council retaliation for 3 years suddenly realized that they were no longer the victims in this war. They were the victors, and their enemies were the ones who should be afraid. President Lim addressed the planet from the orbital command station that now served as Earth's military headquarters. Behind him, the screens showed the wreckage field, where the Grand Fleet had died. 3 years ago, they taught us that trust was weakness, he said to the billions watching across human space. They taught us that mercy was foolishness, and that the only way to survive among the stars was to become more terrible than anything that threatened us. He paused, looking directly into the camera that was broadcasting his words throughout. A galaxy, we have learned their lessons well. We have become what they made us, a species that values survival above all else, and that will exterminate any threat to our existence without hesitation or remorse. The transformation was complete. Humanity had evolved from hopeful explorers seeking their place among the stars to apex predators that hunted entire civilizations. The Council's betrayal had created something that would reshape the galaxy through fear and overwhelming force. In the months that followed, human fleets would appear in system after system, not as conquerors but as exterminators. Species that had participated in the original betrayal were hunted to extinction. Worlds that had celebrated the massacre at Kepler 442c were left as lifeless rocks. The galaxy had wanted sheep. Instead, they had created gods of war who remembered every betrayal and repaid every debt in blood. And they were just getting started. 6 months after the destruction of the Grand Fleet, humanity's war fleets reached the core worlds, the ancient heart of galactic civilization where the Council species had ruled for millennia. These were systems that had never known war, worlds where beings had lived in peace for thousands of generations. Now they burned under the guns of Earth's children. Admiral Sung Ho Nam commanded the Retribution Fleet from his flagship UES Final Judgment. His 200 ships moved through Council space like death incarnate, appearing in system after system to collect payment for humanity's murdered dead. Target acquired, reported his tactical officer as they emerged from hyperspace into the Altair Prime system. Below them, the blue-green world of the Altarians sprawled in innocent beauty, home to 12 billion beings who had once voted to betray humanity to the galaxy. Begin standard collection protocol, Admiral Nam ordered, his voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. The Altarians had been some of humanity's earliest supporters in the Council, or so Earth had believed. Counselor Vexstar himself had welcomed humans into galactic civilization with speeches about friendship and cooperation. Only after the massacre had human intelligence discovered that the Altarians had been planning humanity's destruction from the very beginning. The planetary defense fleet tried to intercept the human ships, but their weapons were designed for the old style of warfare. Energy beams that took time to recharge, missiles that could be intercepted, shields that could be overwhelmed through sustained bombardment. Human weapons were designed for extermination. The stellar lance arrays fired once. 12 defense ships simply vanished, converted from matter to energy in microseconds. The remaining defenders fled to the outer system, leaving their homeworld defenseless against humanity's wrath. This is Admiral Nam of the Terran Defense Force. He broadcast to the planet below. 3 years ago, your representative Counselor Vexstar participated in the massacre of 50,000 humans at Kepler 442c. Your species celebrated our deaths and planned to divide up our territory. On the planet's surface, 12 billion Altarians listened to their death sentence being pronounced in calm, emotionless words. Your military and industrial capacity will now be permanently removed. Your species will survive, but you will never again threaten humanity or any other race. This is the price of betrayal. The bombardment that followed was surgical in its precision. Human ships targeted every military installation, every weapons factory, every shipyard that could produce vessels capable of space travel. Cities were left standing, but the infrastructure that could support interstellar civilization was systematically destroyed. The Altarians would survive, but they would spend the rest of their existence as primitives on their own world, watching the stars they could no longer reach. This pattern repeated itself across dozens of systems: the hegemony core worlds, the crystalline homeworld, the trading centers of the merchant coalition. Each species that had participated in humanity's betrayal found their fleets approaching with the same cold purpose. General Mi Young led the ground operations when orbital bombardment wasn't sufficient. Her Marines wore powered armor that made them nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons, and they carried devices that could level entire city blocks. "We're not here to conquer," she told her troops before each landing. "We're here to collect. Every species that voted for our extermination owes a debt that must be paid." Her forces moved through alien cities like a force of nature, dismantling defense systems and military installations with methodical efficiency. Civilian populations were herded into safe zones and left unharmed, but their ability to threaten humanity was removed forever. The psychological effect was even more devastating than the physical destruction. Species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia were reduced to helpless observers as their civilizations were systematically dismantled by the race they had tried to exterminate, but some council species refused to accept their fate. Deep in the galactic core, Councillor Vextar himself had assembled the last remnants of the council military. 800 ships from 20 different species, all that remained of the forces that had once numbered in the tens of thousands. "This cannot be allowed to continue," he said to his war council aboard the battleship Eternal Judgment. "The humans have become a cancer that will consume the entire galaxy if we don't stop them here." His plan was desperate but simple. While humanity's fleets were scattered across council space collecting their bloody tribute, Earth itself was defended by relatively few ships. A fast strike at the human homeworld might decapitate their war machine and end the nightmare that had consumed galactic civilization. What Vextar didn't understand was that Earth was no longer just a planet. It had become something far more dangerous. Captain Haiyan Rushin of the Deep Strike Command received the intelligence about the Council's final gambit while her ships were patrolling the Outer Rim, hunting down fleeing Council refugees. "Sir," her communications officer reported, "Fleet Command is recalling all units to Sol System immediately. Priority Alpha." Captain Shin smiled. Priority Alpha meant only one thing: someone was stupid enough to attack Earth directly. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "We're going home. It seems our enemies have decided to deliver themselves to us personally." The recall went out across human space. Admiral Nam's Retribution fleet abandoned their systematic destruction of Council infrastructure. Admiral Kim's Shadow fleet emerged from their deep strike operations. Every human ship within jumping distance of Earth began racing toward home. They were not rushing to defend their homeworld. They were hurrying to witness the final lesson that would be taught to the galaxy. Earth had spent 3 years becoming the most heavily fortified world in galactic history. Orbital rings bristled with weapons that could destroy fleets from light years away. The moon had been converted into a massive fortress. Mars housed shipyards that could build new warships. In days rather than months, the asteroid belt had been transformed into a maze of automated defense platforms. Hidden bases throughout the outer system housed reserve fleets that could respond to threats before they ever reached the inner planets. Most importantly, Earth's population had been transformed. The 6 billion humans who lived there were no longer the peaceful explorers who had once dreamed of cooperation among the stars. They were warriors who had been forged by betrayal and tempered by war. When Councillor Vextar's fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol System, they expected to find a few dozen ships defending humanity's homeworld. What they found instead was something that would haunt their nightmares for the brief time they had left to live. The Prometheus fleet waited for them in perfect formation around Earth, 500 ships that represented the pinnacle of human military technology, commanded by Fleet Admiral Insu Beak from his flagship UES Retribution's Dawn. Council Fleet, Admiral Beak broadcast on all frequencies. You have come to the home of humanity. You are no longer hunters. You are prey. Vexstar tried to respond with defiance, but his words died in his throat as the full scope of Earth's defenses became clear. The planet itself was armed with weapons that could crack moons. The orbital stations carried enough firepower to sterilize continents. Even the civilian transports moving between the inner planets were armed with weapons that could destroy warships. "This is impossible," he whispered, staring at his tactical displays. "No single world could support this level of militarization." "You made it possible," Admiral Beak replied, somehow having heard the private comment. "You taught us that survival requires strength, and strength requires sacrifice. We sacrificed everything, our dreams, our innocence, our hope for peace, to become what you made necessary." The battle that followed was less a fight than an execution. The Council ships tried to break through to Earth itself, but they were caught in a web of defensive fire that had been 3 years in the making. Stellar lance batteries fired from the moon, their beams slicing through enemy formations like swords through silk. Kinetic kill vehicles launched from Mars struck targets with the force of nuclear weapons. Quantum torpedoes materialized inside enemy ships, their warheads designed to convert matter directly into energy. "Fall back," Vexstar screamed into his communications array. "All ships retreat to hyperspace," but there was no retreat. The quantum mines that humanity had seeded throughout the system prevented hyperspace jumps. The Council ships were trapped in a killing field that had been designed specifically for this moment. One by one, the last remnants of the Council military were destroyed. Vexstar's flagship lasted the longest, its heavy armor and powerful shields keeping it alive while its escorts died around it. In the end, only the Eternal Judgment remained, drifting powerless with its weapons destroyed and its engines dead. Vexstar found himself staring at the main screen as Admiral Beak's face appeared, calm and emotionless as always. "Counselor Vexstar," the human said quietly, "do you remember the words you spoke when you welcomed humanity into galactic civilization? You promised us friendship among the stars. You promised us a place in the community of intelligent races." Vexstar said nothing. What could he say? "You taught us that promises mean nothing," Admiral Beak continued. "You taught us that trust is weakness and mercy is foolishness. You taught." 10 years had passed since the last Council ship died in the burning wreckage around Earth. The galaxy had learned to live in the shadow of humanity's fleets, and the lesson had been written in the ashes of 100 worlds. The Terran Empire now controlled a quarter of known space, not through conquest in the traditional sense, but through the simple understanding that crossing Earth meant extinction. The remaining species lived in a state of permanent terror, knowing that their survival depended entirely on humanity's mercy, and humanity had learned that mercy was a luxury they could no longer afford. Emperor Deho Lim stood on the observation deck of the Imperial Palace, a massive space station that orbited Earth where the old United Nations headquarters had once welcomed diplomats from across the galaxy. Through the transparent walls, he could see the memorial rings that circled the planet, monuments to the 50,000 humans who had died at Kepler 442c, and the billions of aliens who had paid the price for their species' betrayal. "Your Majesty," Admiral Gunwoo Park approached with the latest reports from the outer territories. "The Vegan Confederation has requested permission to establish a new trade route through Sector 7. Emperor Lim nodded absently. The vegans were one of the few species that had never participated in the Council's betrayal of humanity. They had been allowed to survive and even prosper under the new galactic order, as long as they remembered their place. "Grant the request," he said. "But remind them that any vegan ship found outside designated shipping lanes will be destroyed without warning." "Understood, sir." The rules of the new galaxy were simple. Humanity controlled the space lanes, the major trade routes, and the locations of every significant military installation. Other species were allowed to exist, but only at humanity's pleasure. Any sign of military buildup, any attempt to form alliances, any hint of rebellion was met